Hi, and welcome to Autistamatic Unfiltered, an impromptu series of unscripted films about autistic life and issues whilst I'm too busy to write scripts. In the last few of these unfiltered videos, I've talked about quite serious topics related to marginalisation, gatekeeping and bullying of the autistic community from outside and within. Yesterday, I ran a short poll on Twitter to see if people felt like a change of pace, and the vote went for fun and informative. Today, I'll be talking about why I think so many autistic people love science fiction. The autistic love of science fiction is almost as pervasive a stereotype as being socially awkward or good at maths. In fact, The Big Bang Theory managed to squeeze 12 series out of all three of those. Anyone who argues that Sheldon Cooper was the only autistic character in that series would have to be ready for a long debate. All of the regular male characters in Big Bang and a few of the semi-regulars display strong autistic characteristics, and yet it was never broached in the series itself. Like most stereotypes, it has a foundation in truth, but it certainly doesn't apply to all of us. If I were to post a meme on social media featuring a character from Star Trek, for instance, then I know most of my autistic followers would get it, but there would be some who didn't. If I were to broaden the stereotype and talk about escapist fiction in general, say Tolkien-esque fantasy, superheroes, horror and so on, then I'd capture more autistic people under the umbrella, but for today I'll just talk about sci-fi. I think the autistic attraction to sci-fi can be broken down into three factors: characters, world building and morality. Characters are probably the easiest to illustrate, so I'll start there. If you ask the question, which characters in fiction are coded as autistic? In other words, they exhibit a lot of autistic characteristics in thought, communication or behaviour, but are not explicitly stated to be autistic, then at the top of the list you'll usually find either Spock or Data from Star Trek. Other characters from Star Trek also often come into the reckoning. 7 of 9, the former Borg drone from Star Trek Voyager, pops up often. T'Pol and Phlox from Enterprise, and Odo in Deep Space Nine. All of these characters echo elements of common autistic experience that many of us relate to. They stand apart from their human colleagues, and they sometimes have difficulty relating to human behaviour and decision making. Spock was half human, half logical Vulcan, whilst T'Pol was full-blooded Vulcan. Data was an android without emotion, with whom we followed his efforts to emulate human behaviour and customs. 7 of 9 was assimilated by the Borg collective when she was a child. When she was freed by the Voyager crew decades later, she had problems understanding the differences of opinion and conflicts of interest of her crewmates. And Odo was a shape-shifting alien, initially the only one of his kind. There's probably an entire video, if not more, in the autistic coded characters in Star Trek, so I might return to this topic at a later date. Even when a character isn't coded as autistic, there may be ways in which autists may relate to significant aspects of a character. In the original Star Wars, or A New Hope as it was renamed, we met young, idealistic Luke Skywalker, who didn't fit in on his backwater home planet, but became a powerful Jedi and defeated the Galactic Empire. In the prequel trilogy, Anakin Skywalker was a child prodigy who, despite trying really hard to fit in and excel at his chosen path, was excluded by his peers on the Jedi Council and was steered into a dark path by the one person who seemed to believe in him. In the sequels, we met Rey, who, as an abandoned orphan, grew up on a harsh alien world, unaware of her power and potential. As well as popular science fiction on the screen, we have protagonists in literature to relate to. In The Stars, My Destination, also known as Tiger Tiger, Gully Foyle, a humble grunt on starship freighters, was pushed beyond limits of survival most humans could endure. He discovered an ability nobody else could replicate and was persecuted for it. Then there was Andrew Ender Wiggin, a social misfit, who in Ender's Game saved the human race from extermination by the alien Formix and went on to become a visionary and peacemaker in sequels. One of the most significant literary protagonists for an autistic reader was probably Valentine Michael Smith from Robert Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land. Michael, as he was known later in the book, was a variation of the feral child archetype. He was marooned as a small child on Mars and brought up by native Martians. When he was returned to Earth decades later, he was initially segregated from society. They even prevented him from having contact with women for fear he wouldn't understand the difference between women and himself. Michael eventually discovered abilities no human had experienced before, and rather than integrate into society, he became a kind of religious figure. The book also introduced us to the word grok. To grok something means to have a deep, intuitive understanding of something, to know it or a person completely. Michael's ability to grok things and people echoes the way many autistic people discover talents or interests which they almost instinctively understand, along with the enhanced sensory experiences that can come from hypersensitivity or synesthesia. Many autistic people can point to a number of things or people in their life they grok, even if some everyday things remain mysterious. An American friend of mine, Magnus, even named his autism-themed podcast Groktopus, and I'd heartily recommend giving it a listen. I'll leave a link in the description. Throughout science fiction, there are protagonists who don't fit into the world they were born into, but demonstrate remarkable abilities or unimaginable resilience. Is it any wonder that autistic people who grow up as outsiders in our own societies, often with unrecognised or even suppressed talents, should relate to people in fiction who reflect our own experience? Something science fiction does that mainstream fiction rarely has to is build worlds. Every science fiction story involves environmental elements that are different from contemporary or historical human experience. Whether it be simply changing one detail or a complete reimagining of the world, science fiction authors have to establish new rules, new technologies, political systems, even new geographies to tell their stories. In sci-fi terms, these broadly fall into two categories: utopias and dystopias. Star Trek gave us a utopia in the United Federation of Planets. In the UFP, it didn't matter your skin colour, your gender, your species, or the oddities of your thoughts. There was a place for you. Everybody had a role to play and a chance to excel. The Federation had no system of currency. There was no such thing as financial reward, so people had the chance to do their best rather than just what paid best, or be restricted in their options because of money, class, or social status. Everyone had a right to pursue those abilities they chose to, whether it be cooking, studying archaeology, being an engineer or doctor, or exploring strange new worlds and new civilizations. To boldly go where no one has gone before. In a utopia such as the Federation, the disadvantages autistic people have to struggle against in the world we currently live would no longer apply. Despite their obvious differences from the majority, we saw how characters like Spock, Data, and Reg Barclay were still immensely valued as part of their crews for what they could contribute, rather than held back because they didn't fit in. In a dystopia, we see the exact opposite of something like the Federation. Society is dysfunctional and corrupt. There's often dictatorial regimes and huge imbalances of power. They may even be post-apocalyptic and dominated by dog-eat-dog competition on a personal and visceral scale. They take the dysfunctional aspects of current society and magnify them. In dystopian fiction, the singular character who stands out from the crowd, the one who demonstrates exceptional ingenuity, determination, or courage, usually wins the day, often changing society for the better in the process. Not accepting the status quo and embracing their difference is the deciding factor in their success. These characters not only embody the qualities of being misfits that autistic people relate to, but they willingly go against the grain and they triumph. Something many of us wish we could do, but find ourselves up against impossible odds. From Katniss Everdeen to Max Rokitansky, even Taylor from Planet of the Apes, there's something in those protagonists that resonates in the heart of many an autist. Finally, let's talk about morality in science fiction. A while ago, I did a video as part of the Autism and Relationships series about autistic black and white thinking, in which I talked about the profound sense of morals shared by a huge proportion of autistic people. It's common for us to have a highly developed moral compass that doesn't change direction easily. Our senses of right and wrong are often based on similar principles to utilitarian philosophy, that of the greatest good and doing the minimum of harm.
Logic clearly dictates that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
In science fiction, our heroes are frequently similarly focused on moral outcomes. Whether their cause is emancipation, freedom, or caring for those they love, the moral direction of both protagonists and antagonists is clearly defined. We don't see many grey areas in the struggles we see in sci-fi on the screen or on the page. That's an escapist fantasy for an autist, no matter how dark or complex a story. Much of what makes life hard for us in contemporary life is the blurring of truth and lies, the ambiguity of people's motivations, and the contradictions of everyday life. In sci-fi, we rarely see such muddied waters. The boundaries are clear, the causes are just, and the desired outcomes are clearly defined. It's a world we feel we could cope with better. Even if it's a hostile one, we know where the hostility comes from and what needs to be done about it. Science fiction presents us with things the real world can't. It gives us heroes we can relate to. It shows us better worlds, or worlds people like us have the power to change. It has a distinct sense of morality that just isn't present in the real world. The world we live in has challenges for everyone, not just autistic people. But when we need to entertain ourselves, to blot out the world and lose ourselves in someone else's story, science fiction is usually my first choice, and that of a great many of the autists I know. This has been a brief tour through the scant surface details of why I believe science fiction has a particular appeal to autistic people. I don't know how well this video will go down, but if you'd like me to go into this in more detail, or you have particular characters or worlds that you'd like to see discussed in more depth, then let me know in the comments section. Thank you for watching. Live long and prosper. If you'd like to watch more videos about autistic life, then click here on the logo on the left to subscribe, or on the links on the right to go straight to another video on the channel, or go to Autistamatic.com.